All right, y'all. Welcome to lesson one of anatomy. Today, we're going to be talking through an introduction to the human body. So, what better way to start this entire class than by talking through the history of anatomy and physiology and talking about some of the individuals who contributed to our understanding of anatomy. So excited to get this year started. So, let's go. So it goes without saying that our understanding of the human body is vastly different today than it was centuries ago. And truly, what sparked interest in the human body was just overall curiosity about the body. There were illnesses that were happening that had different symptoms or ailments that followed. There were injuries that occurred in one part of the body but caused pain in a different area of the body, and even death at different ages. And people were just curious, why did this person die? Why did this injury happen and cause these different problems? Or why did this illness have this range of symptoms? So people became increasingly interested in the human body. They wanted to know more about it. And so we had anatomists, medical students, doctors, artists that were sculpting and painting detailed images of human bodies, and even the general public. They were interested in the body, they wanted to know more, and they needed bodies to study. Because it's one thing to look at an external body, but it's another thing to know the inner workings of the human body. And this interest actually gave rise to a very lucrative, very dangerous, and very bizarre line of work known as body snatching. And so, body snatchers, sometimes referred to as the resurrectionists, they would actually go and take corpses from graves or morgues, and they would sell these bodies to medical schools or wealthy people that had the money to pay for them, or even places known as anatomy theaters. And these theaters, you all, they existed, and they would have music playing in the background while someone dissected a body for the public to watch. And you would buy an admission ticket. It was like going to see a movie, but you were seeing a body be dissected. And so there was some pushback, obviously. I mean, people weren't happy with the fact that graves were being robbed, their loved ones were being taken from coffins and sold off to medical schools. And religiously, a lot of people didn't find this to be morally correct or morally right. And these body snatchers began getting attacked at these grave sites. People would wait and watch for them and make sure that this wasn't happening. And so, because there was so much revolt against these dissections and these body snatchers, a few things came into play. So, we had the Murder Act of 1752 enacted, and this actually gave permission and gave the right to dissect criminals' bodies at these medical schools and these different areas. And then from there was a little bit of pushback from there. So the Anatomy Act of 1832 was enacted, in which you could donate your body to science if you wanted to, or if an individual that wasn't that passed away, that didn't have any family step forward, they could use that body at a medical school, and even families could give permission for a body to be taken to a medical school or be dissected or studied. And so we still kind of have that today, to where you can donate your body to science. And you can have different universities that use these cadavers and dissect them to learn more as these students make their way through medical school. When it comes to artists and individuals who contributed to our understanding of the human body, one person is actually often overlooked because their bigger works of art kind of overshadow their work with the human body. And this person is Leonardo da Vinci, y'all. So Da Vinci was very, very intrigued by the human body. He actually performed quite a few different dissections. He would get bodies from hospitals and he would look through them and dissect them because he did want to know more about the body and its organs and its structures. And he would draw these very detailed images. And I've got one up here currently of different skeletal features that are impressive. He was looking at these features. He was drawing very detailed images and taking notes in these journals about the human body. And he had lots of these images. So we're looking at a skull here and different breakdowns of the skull. And even of the heart. He loved the heart. He was very intrigued by the human heart. And he would look through all of the different blood vessels and see how they were connected down into, you're looking at the trachea right here, and into the lungs. So he was very intrigued by the human body. He drew a lot of sketches, and did a lot of work with the human body. And he kind of gets overlooked as far as our understanding of the human body, but he contributed a great deal. We think him more of, the artist who painted Mona Lisa or The Last Supper, but he did a lot of work with the human body and he was very intrigued by it. And in this Renaissance, well, medieval times into the Renaissance era, there were other artists that would actually attend, as I mentioned, these public dissections to learn more. Botticelli was very interested in the human body and painted very detailed images like the birth of Venus. And he wanted to know more about the body and how it works. So when he was painting these images of the body, he wanted them to look natural. He wanted them to look real. And there were even individuals like Van Meervelt who painted these dissections happening. So this is known as the anatomy lesson of Dr. Willem Vandermeer, where you have all of these men present who are watching and overseeing this dissection because they were very intrigued by it. And some of these men might have been doctors. Some of them just might have been wealthy and they wanted to know more, or medical students and so on and so forth. So they were overseeing this anatomy lesson as this man cut through a body and showed individuals what was happening inside. And what's kind of interesting here, and if you will see this in the background, there's even some pictures of some skeletons back here, or some drawings, or that was included in the painting, because a lot of these anatomy theaters would take the skeleton out of the individuals that they had dissected and pose them in the theater, which is kind of bizarre. But these anatomy theaters were a big hit there for a while. They got really unruly. There would be arguments about the human body. People would attend in the masses. And then down the street, what was crazy is that there would also be religious services happening that would basically be praying for the person that was being dissected. And it was their way of showing that they didn't really believe in the fact that people should be dissected. They believed that people should be buried and left alone. But this gave rise to our understanding of the human body in a very twisted way, in a very bizarre way, but nonetheless, we were able to understand the human body more and more. So when you look back at images that were taken of medical schools, or even drawings of medical schools, it's pretty crazy to look at. So when you're looking at this picture of all these bodies laying there on those tables, I can basically smell this picture just looking at it, because embalming wasn't a thing for a very long time. So when you have these body snatchers taking bodies and bringing them to medical schools or areas where they'd be studied, you had a little bit of time there to go through those bodies, dissect them, learn from them before they started decaying and decomposing. And now when you see our facilities and how state of the art they are, you see that we've learned so much because we're advancing in technology. We're advancing in our medical procedures and even our preservation procedures, to where once upon a time you'd have to refrigerate most of these bodies, most of these items. And even when I was in high school, the specimen that we dissected had to be refrigerated. And now they're just vacuum sealed and preservative, and I've got them hanging out in a closet in the science department. So it's kind of crazy how far we've come. And even as much as there are synthetic cadaver options rather than actually having human bodies, because there is a shortage, and some of the schools have stopped using cadavers because they can't get the bodies donated to them. So they've started using synthetic cadavers, or even they have put images and different digital platforms in place where you can dissect a cadaver virtually. So this is what you're seeing here, is an image of a virtual cadaver. So all of this has led to our understanding of the human body. And again, we're still evolving. We're still understanding more and more about the body as days pass. So in this class, we will study both anatomy and physiology. And it's incredibly important to understand the difference between those two disciplines, because they come together very well. They are unified in providing a very thorough look at the body, but they're very different in what they study. And so we'll combine these two disciplines in order to learn more about the human body. Anatomy is about structures. So anatomy studies structures or morphology, all these different body parts, and looking at their organization in the human body. So that particular suffix is Greek in origin, and it means cutting up, and anatomists rely on examination. So when we're studying anatomy, we're looking at different parts of the body. We are understanding how they are organized. For instance, the digestive system, looking at how we move from the oral cavity into the esophagus, into the stomach, into the small intestines, into the large intestine, so on and so forth. So looking at how that is organized to create the digestive system. So it's more about observing and just kind of seeing that organization and all those body parts put together. Physiology, on the other hand, is different. But again, they go hand in hand because physiology considers the function of those body parts, what they do and how they do it. So this word is also Greek in origin, and it means relationship to nature. And physiologists rely on experimentation to know more about these body parts. So take the heart, for instance. You can look at a heart, and we will dissect a heart in this class, and you can look at that structure and see, the four chambers, the atria and the ventricles. You can look at the great vessels, the aorta, the pulmonary artery and veins, the inferior and superior vena cava. And then you can look at the valves of the heart. And you can understand all these pieces and see all the components and look at the thickness of the walls in a particular area of the heart and so on and so forth. But it's another thing to understand how it's moving blood from point A to point B, how it's getting blood throughout the body, how it maintains pressure and is able to get blood to your brain or down to your feet. So when we talk through all of these structures, it's really important to note that function follows form. We'll look at the anatomy first. So the way I've set up most of these lectures and how most of these days that we study different systems, we'll look at structures first. We'll talk through the anatomy of the heart or the anatomy of the digestive system, and then we'll get into the physiology. So we'll talk through structures of the respiratory system and then get into air pressure and how we're able to inhale and exhale and have these different volumes of air. So these two disciplines go hand in hand in this class. And it's important to note that they study different things, but they are beautifully unified to allow for us to learn more about the human body. We will study anatomy in a few different ways in this class. And what I mean by that is I've got them defined through here, but there's different types of anatomy. Regional anatomy will come when we study the skeletal system and the muscular system. So this is a study of anatomy based on regions or divisions of the body. And there's an emphasis on relations between the structures of that region. So when we look at, for instance, the leg of the human body or the arm or the shoulder joint, whatever it might be, we will look at the structures that are involved there. So the knee, for instance, we'll look at the bones that make up that knee joint. We will look at the ligaments that are present there and even the cartilages and the different components that make the knee joint a movable hinge joint. And then we have systemic anatomy. So this is a study of anatomy based on body systems and their functioning throughout the body. I have organized this class to cover systemic anatomy. So this is how we will progress through this class. We start with this intro and then we move into histology. Then from there, we start systemic anatomy. We go into the integumentary system, and we'll talk about all things that deal with the integumentary system, then the skeletal system, and then the muscular, then the nervous, and so on and so forth. So we'll go in little chunks, and all along the way, we will see how all of these different systems of the human body unite to make the body function and to have this homeostatic role in keeping our body healthy and happy and functioning on a daily basis. Then there's gross anatomy. So study of anatomy that is visible to the naked eye. So this is macroscopic. And gross anatomy, you guys have probably, if you're looking into medical school or, physical therapy, you've probably seen that gross anatomy is actually a class that you will take. And that's when those cadavers come into play because it's looking at stuff and looking at structures and body parts that you can see with your eyes. And we'll study gross anatomy when we are looking at or doing all these different dissections, be it the heart, the cat, the kidney, whatever it might be. That's gross anatomy, seeing these structures with your eyes. And then microscopic anatomy is a study of anatomy at the microscopic level, and that's the cellular level. And so microscopic anatomy will be embedded along the way, especially when we get into the histology unit, because with histology and the study of tissues are given their particular identities based on the cells that make them up. So from there, once you understand that those cellular components and understand the characteristics of those tissues, you see why certain tissues come together to form particular organs. And again, function follows form. So those organs are able to do what they need to do on a daily basis because of the tissues and the cellular components that make them up. So we'll study the cellular components of different tissues, and we will study the cellular components of different tissues and particular organs even as well. So I want to end today's first lecture by talking through levels of organization. And this should be a review because even though this exact image is a little bit more complex than probably what you've seen before, your biology teacher, whoever that might have been, and if it was me, then I know I've shown you a very similar image, should have talked through how the body is parts within parts, how you have these levels of complexity that build to make a human being or a human body. And so, again, human body is composed of parts within parts, and it's important to understand this because when we talk through all of these body systems, and as we move through this year and learn about the human body, we're going to talk about things at a chemical level. So right here, so I've got that at the top of the pyramid, or this image just has that at the top of the pyramid, where you've got hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms, all that are present within the human body, lots of different atoms that we'll talk about when it comes to, maintaining homeostasis and looking at the exchange of molecules and looking at how they play a role in our everyday functioning. Then we'll look at the molecular level. So we got a water molecule here. We'll move to the cellular level. And so at the cellular level, we have all different cells. So there's not just one type of cell in the body. There are just dozens upon dozens. So the example here, we have a smooth muscle cell, and we'll talk about it because if you guys look at its overall form, its function will follow that form and what it can do for the human body and where it is. And so from there, we'll look at those cells and how they build into the tissue level. So a community of similar cells that form a body tissue. Then we'll look at how these tissues come together to form an organ. And so we'll look at, again, how function follows form, how different tissues form different organs and how those organs function because of the tissues that make them up. And then we'll look at these different systems. And this is, again, how this class is mainly organized as far as the different units. We move by systems, be it the integumentary system, the urinary system, the cardiovascular system. And overall, we'll see how these systems come together to form our overall body and the overall organism that we are. I'm so excited to teach you all so much about the body this year. Thanks for sticking with me. Catch you next time.